At 11:47 a.m. on May 29, 1943, Captain James Hartwell climbed into the cockpit of his B-17 at RAF Alconbury, the overcast sky of Cambridgeshire stretching pale above the dispersal field. The ground crew was finishing their final checks, feeding the last belt of 50 caliber ammunition into the modified bomber's 17th gun position. The aircraft shimmered under the spring sunlight, an experimental fortress that looked more like a porcupine than a plane. Hartwell was only 26 years old, a veteran of 42 combat missions, but he had zero experience with what he was about to fly. The YB-40 weighed nearly 4,000 pounds, more than any flying fortress he'd ever touched. Beneath its thick skin of aluminum, the bomber carried a staggering 11,275 rounds of ammunition, 3 times more than the standard B-17F. In the 3 months before May, the 8th Air Force had suffered devastating losses, 173 flying fortresses shot down over Europe. Every mission deep into Germany became a suicide run. Without long-range fighter escorts, Luftwaffe interceptors were tearing the bomber formations apart on their return legs. Focke-Wulf 190s attacked from 12 o'clock high, where the B-17's nose guns couldn't track fast enough. Messerschmitt 109s dove vertically through the formations, picking off stragglers that fell behind. Crews called it the Gauntlet. Half never made it to their 25th mission. The solution seemed deceptively simple. If fighters couldn't escort the bombers to Germany and back, then make a bomber that could fight like a fighter. At Wright Field, Army Air Force's engineers stripped a B-17F down to its bones. Everything that didn't shoot was removed. The bombs were gone. The bombardier station was replaced with a twin 50 caliber Chin turret, the first of its kind. A second dorsal turret was installed behind the radio room. Single waist guns became twin mounts. Cheek guns were added along the forward fuselage. Extra armor plating protected the crew. 16 50 caliber Browning M2s bristled from its skin, turning the aircraft into a gunship rather than a bomber. The engineers called it Project 80. Crews would nickname it something more poetic, the YB-40, the Flying Destroyer. In early 1943, Douglas Aircraft in Tulsa completed 12 conversions, each one a handcrafted experiment. The modified bombers went to the 92nd Bombardment Group at Alconbury in May. Colonel William Reed selected 7 crews to test them in combat. Hartwell drew aircraft, 42-5738, a silver fortress his men called Hedgehog, but the nickname proved prophetic. The YB-40 bristled with spikes, and it handled like one, too. Standard B-17Fs could climb to 20,000 feet in 25 minutes. The YB-40 took 48. The control yoke felt heavy, sluggish. The center of gravity was all wrong. The massive ammunition storage sat behind the bomb bay, shifting the balance aft. Still, Hartwell couldn't help admiring the firepower. The Chin turret alone could shred a Focke-Wulf before it even came within range. Every approach vector, front, rear, high, and low, was covered by overlapping fields of fire. For the first time, a bomber might actually defend itself without fighters. The mission brief was simple. Escort the main formation to Saint-Nazaire, hit the submarine pens, and bring everyone home. The YB-40s were positioned in the most vulnerable sections, low squadron, trail element, the favorite hunting grounds for German fighters. At 1:25 p.m., Hartwell started the engines. The Wright Cyclones coughed to life one by one, 4 deep roars echoing across the airfield. At 1:50 p.m., the control tower cleared them for takeoff. Hedgehog rolled down the runway, followed by 168 other B-17s. Target time, 4 p.m. Cut to narrator tone. If you want to see how Hartwell's flying destroyer performed against the Luftwaffe, hit that like button. Every like helps us share these forgotten innovations. And subscribe for more untold stories of World War II engineering brilliance. Back to Hartwell. The formation reached the French coast at 3:30 p.m. Flak bursts peppered the sky above Guernsey, black flowers blooming at 20,000 feet. Radio chatter reported German fighters scrambling from Rennes airfields. Inside Hedgehog, the crew checked fuel and instruments. Hartwell's flight engineer, Technical Sergeant Paul Morrison, reported fuel consumption higher than briefed, the price of all that extra weight. The YB-40 burned greedily, climbing to altitude. At 4:02 p.m., Saint-Nazaire appeared through broken clouds. The main formation dropped their bombs and turned for home. The moment they released their loads, the standard B-17s became lighter, faster, more responsive. The YB-40s, still carrying their 4,000 extra pounds of ammunition, lagged behind. Hartwell pushed his throttles to maximum continuous power. Hedgehog managed 148 miles per hour, while the rest of the formation accelerated past to 160. Morrison monitored the engines. Cylinder head temperature on numbers 3 was climbing into the red. The Wright Cyclones were working harder than they were ever designed to. He throttled back engine 3 to prevent overheating. The aircraft slowed again, 142 miles per hour. Ahead, the main formation was already 3 miles away. Through the side windows, Hartwell saw the other YB-40s falling behind as well, every one of them struggling in the same doomed race. Then came the radio call from the waist compartment. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney, the radio operator and waist gunner, reported contrails at 4 o'clock high. Focke-Wulfs, 6, maybe 8, from Jagerschwader 2, based at Vannes. They were hunting stragglers. Hartwell keyed the intercom. All gunners, track your targets. The chin turret gunner confirmed good visibility. The ball turret rotated smoothly. Both waist gunners loaded and tracking. At 5 o'clock, the first Focke-Wulf 190 dove in from high altitude. The tail gunner opened fire at 800 yards, streams of 50 caliber tracers cutting the air. The German pilot broke left, pulling away without firing. A second pair came from 11 o'clock high. The chin turret tracked the lead fighter and fired a 4-second burst. Rounds stitched across the FW-190's cowling. Black smoke poured from its nose as it rolled inverted and plunged toward the channel. Delaney confirmed the kill from the waist position. For 6 minutes, the YB-40 worked exactly as intended, a fortress bristling with overlapping arcs of fire. 3 more attacks came and broke off early. No fighter dared stay in the kill zone, but Hartwell's triumph was short-lived. The main formation was now 6 miles ahead, then 7. The blue horizon of the bomber stream faded into haze. Hedgehog was alone. Morrison reported they'd burned 800 gallons more fuel than expected. At current power, they had maybe 90 minutes to Alconbury. The main formation would land in 70. 2 more Focke-Wulfs appeared at 2 o'clock high. This time, they didn't break off. They had learned the YB-40's weakness. It couldn't climb, couldn't accelerate, couldn't run. The German fighters began circling, patient, waiting for the perfect angle to strike. Hartwell advanced the throttles again. Engine number 3's temperature needle went red. Morrison said nothing. Both men knew the truth. The escort bomber that was built to protect had become the target it was supposed to save. At 4:43 p.m., 3 Focke-Wulfs attacked from different vectors, high right, low left, and dead ahead at 12 o'clock level. Hartwell held course. The YB-40 turned like a freight train. Every gun position opened fire. Chin, top, ball, and both waists. The aircraft shuddered under the recoil of 8 guns firing at once. The lead Focke-Wulf's canopy shattered. It rolled away, trailing smoke. But another pressed its attack. A burst of 20mm cannon shells tore through Hedgehog's right wing, severing a hydraulic line. "Right landing gear hydraulics are gone," Delaney shouted. They would have to crank the gear down manually, if they made it back at all. At that moment, they were 8 miles behind the main formation, alone over occupied France, German fighters circling like wolves. At 4:43 p.m., the sky over western France erupted in chaos. 3 Focke-Wulf 190s attacked from 3 directions, high right, low left, and 12 o'clock level. Captain James Hartwell couldn't maneuver. The YB-40 was too heavy, its wings biting at the air like an overloaded freighter. He held course. The gunners opened fire in unison, chin, top, ball, and both waist guns. The flying destroyer came alive, spitting streams of red tracers into the haze. The recoil shook the entire aircraft, rattling its frame like a giant drum. The lead Focke-Wulf's canopy exploded in a burst of sparks. The fighter rolled and vanished, trailing smoke. The high attacker broke off. The low attacker pressed in, firing a 2-second burst of 20mm cannon shells. Explosions tore through Hedgehog's right wing. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the waist compartment like mist. "Right landing gear hydraulics are gone." Delaney's voice cracked over the intercom. Hartwell didn't flinch. He'd flown damaged B-17s before, but never one this sluggish. Morrison, the flight engineer, checked the panel. "We've lost pressure on the starboard line. Gear'll have to be hand-cranked." The aircraft was still 8 miles behind the main formation. They were alone, deep over occupied France. Below them, the patchwork fields of Brittany slid by. Tiny farmhouses, narrow roads, the Loire glimmering like a ribbon of steel. Every minute they stayed in that sky meant another minute for the Luftwaffe to close in. The radio crackled to life. "This is Captain Hayes, 305th Group. Aircraft, 425741. We're falling behind, too. Can you read?" Hartwell answered immediately. "Roger that, Hayes. Form up. We'll give them a harder target." 2 flying destroyers now drifted in the same pocket of empty air, far behind their squadrons. Each one carrying 16 50 caliber guns, but weighed down by 4,000 pounds of ammunition they couldn't drop. Hayes descended from 21,000 feet to match Hedgehog's altitude at 19,500. Side by side, the 2 YB-40s cut lonely silhouettes against the afternoon haze. Around them, 4 to 6 Focke-Wulfs circled like sharks. They didn't rush in this time. The German pilots had learned quickly. The YB-40s couldn't run. They'd wait for fatigue, for overheating engines, for the moment when the bombers would lose another 100 feet. Hartwell wiped sweat from his forehead. His hands trembled slightly on the yoke. The Wright Cyclones were overheating again, their cylinder head temperatures edging past the red line. Morrison throttled back number 3 engine. Again, at 5:07 p.m., Hedgehog crossed the French coast, outbound, gray water stretching ahead. 53 miles to the English shore. To any other B-17, that distance would have been a sigh of relief. To Hartwell, it felt like eternity. "Fuel check?" he asked. Morrison scanned the gauges. 72 minutes to Alconbury, if the engines hold. They wouldn't make it if the Germans kept them pinned down. The Focke-Wulf circled closer now, tightening their formation. 1 pilot, a veteran from Jagdgeschwader 2, Richthofen, recognized the heavier bomber from intelligence photos. ZLYB-40, he radioed. Target YB-40. The Luftwaffe had begun identifying these odd turret-laden bombers as easy kills. At 5:22 p.m., 2 Messerschmitt 109s appeared from 6 o'clock high, sunlight glinting off their canopies. The intercept was inevitable. Bandits, 6 o'clock, range 400 yards and closing. Tail Gunner Staff Sergeant Raymond Kack shouted into his throat mic. The fighters dove through 18,000 feet, their cannon flashes bright against the sky. Hartwell couldn't climb, couldn't turn. He had to trust his crew. Kack opened fire first. 50 caliber tracers sliced through the air, crossing at 600 yards. The German pilot jinked, diving steeply, firing a burst that stitched the sky above the tail. "They're coming again," Morrison yelled. Both Messerschmitts pulled up, circled wide, then dove again. This time, 20mm shells ripped through the tail section. One exploded near the horizontal stabilizer, another slammed into the fuselage, barely 2 feet behind Koch's armor plate. The bomber lurched. The control yoke went soft. Elevator cables intact, but trim tabs jammed. Morrison reported, after crawling back to check. Hartwell gritted his teeth. "Then we muscle it home." The German fighters climbed for another pass, but from the northeast came salvation. At 5:31 p.m., 4 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts appeared, diving like silver arrows. They'd been sweeping over Belgium when they heard distress calls about stragglers under attack. The P-47s slashed down toward the Messerschmitts, guns blazing. "Thunderbolts, bless those bastards," Delaney whooped from the waist position. The German fighters saw them and broke off, turning east for France. The P-47s didn't pursue. They formed up alongside the 2 wounded YB-40s and wagged their wings. A silent promise. "We'll see you home." Hartwell checked his fuel again. 37 minutes remaining, 29 miles to landfall. They'd barely make it. Beside him, Hayes's aircraft wasn't doing well. Number 2 engine oil pressures dropping, throttling back. Hartwell could hear the strain in Hayes's voice. Then, minutes later, "Number 2's gone. Feathering prop." The second YB-40 descended through 15,000 feet, trailing smoke. Morrison's quick calculation said it all. Hayes wouldn't make Alconbury, maybe not even England. At 5:53 p.m., the gray cliffs of the English coast appeared on the horizon. Both crews exhaled at once. Hayes radioed, "We're going for RAF Manston. 3 engines only." The airfield on the Kent Peninsula had become a haven for damaged bombers limping home from France. Hartwell watched Hayes's gunship peel away, descending slowly toward the emergency strip. "Good luck, Hedgehog 2. See you on the ground," Hayes replied, his voice fading into static. Morrison leaned over the control panel. "Captain, we're down to reserve fuel. Maybe 40 minutes. Hartwell nodded, his arms trembling from fighting the jammed trim tab. Every vibration rattled his shoulders. The British coast was only minutes away, but he couldn't relax. One more mechanical failure, one more engine overheating, and the YB-40 would ditch into the channel. They crossed the shoreline just after 6 p.m., the crew cheering quietly, exhausted but alive. Below, the fields of Kent glowed gold under the setting sun. Hartwell circled for approach, running through the emergency checklist. "Hydraulic systems still gone. We'll have to crank it down by hand." Morrison climbed into the narrow compartment and began turning the emergency wheel. Sweat poured down his face. It took nearly 7 minutes before the right gear locked into position. At 6:18 p.m., Hedgehog touched down at R80 RAF Alconbury, bouncing once, then settling hard. The tires screamed, smoke rising from the brakes. She rolled to a stop halfway down the runway. The crew sat in silence for a moment, listening to the ticking of hot metal. Outside, the ground crew rushed forward. 16 bullet holes in the fuselage, 1 severed hydraulic line, a damaged stabilizer. The smell of burned oil hung heavy in the air. Colonel William Reed was waiting at the hard stand, hands in his flight jacket pockets. He wanted Hartwell's assessment before the engines even cooled. Hartwell climbed down, flight suit soaked with sweat. His hands still shook from the long flight. Reed's first question was short. "Well, Captain, how'd she do?" Hartwell looked back at the bullet-riddled fuselage, the massive chin turret gleaming under the English sun. He exhaled. "It can't keep up, sir." Those 4 words sealed the YB-40's fate. But for now, the flying destroyer had made it home. Barely. When Hedgehog rolled to a stop at RAF Alconbury at 6:18 p.m., the airfield fell quiet for a few seconds. The ground crew, men who had loaded the heavy belts of ammunition that morning, stared at the wounded fortress in disbelief. Its aluminum skin was riddled with holes, oil streaks glistened down the right wing, and hydraulic fluid pooled under the landing gear, yet the crew had survived. In the spring of 1943, that alone was a victory. Colonel William Reed climbed onto the wing, leaned down to meet Captain James Hartwell's exhausted eyes, and asked the only question that mattered. Was it worth it? Hartwell didn't answer right away. His gloves were black with oil, his arms still numb from wrestling the yoke for nearly 2 hours. Finally, he said 3 words that would echo through the test reports filed that night. "It can't keep up." That sentence ended months of theory and optimism. But the Army Air Forces weren't ready to give up. The Air Technical Service Command at Wright Field wanted data, not anecdotes. The Y-40 had shown incredible firepower. One of the Focke-Wulfs had been shredded before it even fired a shot. But the aircraft's flight performance was an undeniable liability, so they ordered more missions. Between June 15th and July 29th, 1943, the 92nd Bombardment Group flew the YB-40 on 7 additional combat sorties, hoping that revised tactics or new formation positions could make a difference. The second test came on June 15th, targeting Le Mans. 4 YB-40s flew escort positions. Once again, when the main formation dropped its bombs, the lighter B-17Fs climbed away, leaving the gunships behind. By the time the YB-40s reached the coast, they were scattered, each one flying alone. The third mission, on June 22nd, struck the IG Farben synthetic rubber plant at Hulls. 11 YB-40s participated, the largest deployment of the modified bomber to date. Over the target, heavy flak burst at 25,000 feet. 1 YB-40, tail number 42 5A743, was hit and went down in flames near the Rhine. Of the remaining 10, all limped home hours behind the rest of the force. Engineers at Abbott's Ripton Depot tried to fix the design flaws. They moved ammunition boxes forward, adjusted feed mechanisms, and even experimented with reducing armor near the radio compartment to lighten the load. The modifications improved handling slightly, but not enough. A standard B-17F, fully loaded with bombs, weighed about 65,000 pounds at takeoff. After dropping its bombs, it became 17,000 pounds lighter. It could climb faster, cruise farther, and evade interception on the return leg. The YB-40, on the other hand, weighed 68,000 pounds at takeoff and remained nearly 64,000 pounds after combat. 4,000 pounds of extra guns, ammo, and armor that couldn't be jettisoned. Every YB-40 eventually found itself flying alone, an easy target for German interceptors. On June 28th, 6 YB-40s returned to Saint-Nazaire, the same deadly route Hartwell had flown a month earlier. They claimed one Focke-Wulf destroyed, but once again all 6 fell behind the main formation. One crew reported they had been alone over France for 43 minutes before crossing the coast. Alone, one gunner wrote in his debriefing report, means vulnerable. The Air Force began compiling statistics. After 48 sorties, the YB-40s claimed 5 confirmed kills, 2 probables, and lost 1 aircraft. That ratio, 7 enemy fighters destroyed for 1 gunship lost, might have looked impressive on paper, but the operational reality was grim. Every YB-40 had fallen behind its formation after the bomb drop. The average separation distance was 7 miles. The average time alone over enemy territory, 38 minutes. The German pilots quickly recognized the YB-40's unique silhouette. The extradorsal turret, the lack of bomb bay doors, the awkward weight distribution. Reports recovered after the war from Luftwaffe Fighter Command show that Adolf Galland, Germany's famed ace and general of fighters, reviewed intelligence photos of the YB-40 in early July. His assessment was blunt. It is not a bomber. It is a slow, heavily armed target. My pilots will avoid it when in formation and destroy it when it is alone. The Luftwaffe adapted their tactics almost overnight. Instead of diving through the main bomber streams, German fighters began waiting for the gunships to lag, then pounced on them from high altitude. Back at Alconbury, morale among YB-40 crews plummeted. Some began calling their planes anchor fortresses because they dragged the formation down. Others joked grimly that they weren't escort bombers. They were bait. Colonel Reed defended his men. They did their job, he wrote in his final memo to headquarters. The concept was flawed, not the crews. In early July 1943, the 8th Air Force quietly began withdrawing the aircraft from frontline duty. The final combat test came on July 29th, a mission to the U-boat yards at Kiel. 2 YB-40s took off from Alconbury under gray skies. Both fell behind as soon as the bombers turned home. Both required escort from P-47s to make it back to England. Neither reached its assigned base. One landed at RAF Manston on fumes, the other at Bassingbourn, leaking oil and fuel. The next morning, General Karl Spaatz signed the cancellation order. The YB-40 program was officially terminated. By August, the 12 surviving aircraft were grounded. In November 1943, all were shipped back to the United States. 4 were stripped and converted back into standard B-17s. The rest became gunnery trainers for air schools in Florida and Texas. The cost of the program was staggering for the time, $469,000 per aircraft, nearly $5.6 million in total. The official summary, filed by the Air Technical Service Command, concluded that the YB-40 concept, while innovative, is unsatisfactory for continued combat use due to excessive weight and inferior performance relative to standard B-17 bombers. But even in failure, there were lessons. One report from Wright Field noted that the aircraft's nose turret demonstrated exceptional defensive capability. Another highlighted improvements in crew protection, gun positioning, and visibility. Buried in those pages was the seed of something revolutionary. Because while the flying destroyer had failed as an escort, one feature aboard the YB-40 had worked better than anyone expected, and it would soon redefine bomber survivability for the rest of the war. That feature was the Bendix chin turret, mounted under the nose. It allowed 2 50 caliber Browning M2s to cover the most dangerous approach angle. 12 o'clock high, the blind spot that had doomed hundreds of B-17s before. As data flowed back from combat reports, Boeing's engineers took notice. By September 1943, the chin turret design from the YB-40 was already being integrated into new production models. The next evolution of the Flying Fortress was about to be born. When the YB-40 program was officially canceled in August 1943, most of the U.S. Army Air Forces considered it another dead-end experiment, a $5.6 million mistake. 12 aircraft, 3 months of combat, a handful of kills, and a string of failures. But deep inside the engineering offices at Wright Field and Boeing's Plant 2 in Seattle, the reports told a different story. Buried between lines of disappointment were 3 discoveries, 3 design improvements that would quietly shape the most successful Flying Fortress ever built. The first breakthrough, the chin turret. Every after-action report from the YB-40 mentioned one thing consistently. The Bendix chin turret worked flawlessly. Until that innovation, B-17 crews had no true defense against head-on attacks. Early German tactics exploited this fatal weakness. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s approached from 12 o'clock high, closing head-on at over 400 miles per hour. The bombardier's view was blocked by the Norden bomb sight. The cheek guns on each side of the nose had limited traverse. The Luftwaffe called it the Kammhuber Pass. American crews called it suicide. The YB-40 changed that. Its twin 50-caliber guns, mounted in a powered turret under the nose, could rotate freely and elevate to cover that vulnerable sector. The remote-control Bendix system, operated by the bombardier, allowed precise, gyro-stabilized aim. Combat crews reported that frontal attacks either broke off early or missed entirely once the chin turret opened fire. At Wright Field, engineers reviewed camera gun footage from Hartwell's mission. In nearly every instance, frontal assaults were stopped cold. Boeing immediately incorporated the turret into the production line. By September 1943, Douglas Aircraft in Tulsa began installing Bendix Model A turrets on the last 86 B-17 FDL aircraft, leaving the assembly line. Crews who received them called it the answer to 12 o'clock high. The birth of the B-17G. The following month, the design entered full production under the new designation B-17G. The first prototype rolled out of Boeing's Seattle factory in December 1943. It looked almost identical to the B-17F until you saw the turret gleaming under its nose like a predator's jaw. The effect was immediate. During its first test combat mission with the 91st Bomb Group over Gelsenkirchen, 12 frontal attacks were recorded. 10 broke off early. The remaining 2 pressed through, both taking heavy hits. One Focke-Wulf was confirmed destroyed. Not a single B-17 with a chin turret was lost to a head-on attack that day. Within 3 months, Boeing, Douglas, and Vega had standardized production. By June 1944, they were producing over 230 B-17Gs per month, an industrial miracle. A total of 8,680 aircraft would be delivered before production ended in April 1945. Every single one carried the YB-40's chin turret. Statistics from the 8th Air Force tell the story better than words. After the chin turret became standard, losses from frontal attacks dropped by 71%. In one 6-month span, the 303rd Bomb Group reported their loss rate fell from 12% to 3%. The 379th went from 11% to 4%, and the 384th, which kept meticulous combat logs, recorded 43 bombers lost to frontal attacks before the upgrade, but only 14 in the 12 months after. The turret, that began as an experiment on 12 failures, ended up saving more than 2,300 bomber crews across the European theater. The second breakthrough, the staggered waist guns. The YB-40 engineers had also noticed another problem in standard B-17s. The waist gunners kept bumping into each other. In the original configuration, the left and right gun positions sat directly opposite one another, just a few feet apart. During attacks from beam angles, the gunners' elbows, belts, and even gun barrels collided. Combat footage showed them literally fighting for space in the middle of a dogfight. On the YB-40, engineers moved the right side waist gun forward 30 inches, creating a staggered configuration. Now, each gunner had a clear field of fire. They could move freely without interference, coordinate bursts, and track fast-moving targets longer. After evaluation flights, Boeing incorporated the staggered waist gun arrangement into the B-17G design. Field reports confirmed the improvement. Waist gunners now maintain target lock for an average of 27 seconds, more than double the 12-second average on earlier models. It meant longer, steadier fire and fewer jams caused by rushed reloading. The third breakthrough, the Cheyenne tail. The final innovation came from an unexpected source. The YB-40's tail gunner himself, Staff Sergeant Raymond Cack. After his harrowing mission with Hartwell, Cack wrote in his debriefing that visibility from the standard tail position was dangerously limited. The small windows restricted his view, especially of fighters approaching from 6 o'clock low. The report reached the Cheyenne Modification Center in Wyoming, where engineers had been experimenting with new turret shapes. They redesigned the entire tail assembly. Larger windows, a revised Cheyenne tail turret with improved gun elevation and stronger armor protection. It became standard on late production B-17Gs. Crews loved it. The improved visibility allowed tail gunners to spot attacks earlier and coordinate defensive fire more effectively with the waist positions. A legacy forged in failure. By February 1944, the transformation was complete. The B-17G, equipped with the chin turret, staggered waist guns, and Cheyenne tail, had become the definitive flying fortress, the version most remembered today. Each B-17G carried the DNA of the YB-40, even if most crews didn't realize it. On missions to Berlin, Munich, and the Ruhr Valley, these fortresses flew through Flak fighter swarms that would have destroyed earlier models. And every time a Focke-Wulf broke off from a frontal attack, or a waist gunner kept a fighter off his wing a few seconds longer, they were using ideas born from a failed experiment that lasted only 3 months. By VE Day, the 8th Air Force operated 32 heavy bombardment groups, 26 in Europe, 4 in Italy, and 2 in the Pacific. Each group flew 48 aircraft per mission. That's 1,936 B-17Gs in combat at once, all carrying the chin turret that began on the YB-40. Across 290,000 sorties, the math tells its own story. That single innovation prevented an estimated 2,300 bomber losses, which meant more than 23,000 men made it home who otherwise wouldn't have. The irony of the flying destroyer. The YB-40 had been built to protect the bombers. In practice, it became the bomber that needed protecting. But its legacy proved something deeper, that even a failure could change the course of a war. At Wright Field, one engineer reportedly said during the debrief, "The YB-40 didn't fail us. It taught us what we didn't know we needed." In wartime innovation, no lesson is wasted. What had started as an overarmed, overweight experiment had turned into a blueprint for the most resilient bomber of World War II. The flying destroyer died, but its ideas lived on in steel, aluminum, and gunfire.